Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the latest installment of our NewsNow podcast. We have MPP from Niagara West Sam Oosterhoff here today, and we're going to cover some issues that are on everyone's mind, both locally and on a larger scale. And I wanted to start, Sam, with some of a tariff update, just in terms of, because it'll impact everybody from what they get at the grocery store to if they're looking for a vehicle. So maybe, Sam, if you could just start with a bit of an overview on what your government's been doing to prepare for that.
Absolutely. So we've known for months that we could be facing a trade war with the United States, and frankly for years we've known that the USMCA free trade agreement, the renegotiation of NAFTA that went through a number of years ago, was coming up for reconsideration again in 2026. And so we've been planning for that. And really we've had an approach until recently that really emphasized the fact that when we work closely with the United States as their friends, as their allies, as their partners, it's good for workers here in Ontario, it's good for consumers here in Ontario and jobs in this province, but it's also good for Americans. And we've really put forward a fortress and can solution to both growing their economy and growing our economy, whether it's our interconnectedness on energy policy, whether it's the critical minerals that we have in Northern Ontario that they need for national defense, that they need for everything from semiconductors and chips to so many of the industries that they rely on, or if it's batteries for EVs, absolutely, or even just the amount of back and forth that we see on our agricultural products. You know, there's a lot of raw material and products here in Ontario and Canada that's exported, that's then refined in some cases and imported. And if you take out oil and gas, we actually don't really have a trade deficit with the United States. We're split smack down the middle. And Ontario specifically has $500 billion, almost $1 trillion of two-way trade with the Americans. But that's almost $250 billion each way. There's 9 million American workers who wake up every single morning reliant on exports that come to Ontario. So the first part of our strategy is, listen, we want to work together with you. We want to have a solution that works for workers there and here. But if you're going to go forward with tariffs that will hurt workers in the United States and in Canada, we are going to take every action necessary to protect Ontario's workers and jobs, and we have been putting forward a plan for potential retaliation as well if that's necessary.
You pretty much have to.
Well, in a way,
otherwise you're sitting down.
Trump is someone who seems to sense weakness a mile away or 5 miles away, and he's someone who,
or try to sell that it's there.
Right, and it seems like he is someone who is not willing to just have a checklist where it says, look, are these your concerns around border or around national security, defense spending, or trade, and address those. He's moving all over the place in terms of what metrics he lays out as success. But we've been clear we need to have a strong voice at that table. Premier Ford has been stepping forward into what bluntly is a vacuum right now. We haven't seen a lot from Ottawa on their actions. And we said, look, if you're going to hit Canadian auto workers, for example, there's going to be impacts through first measures like, for example, barring the largest purchaser of alcohol in the world, the LCBO, from purchasing California wines and Kentucky bourbon and all those sorts of spirits. So there's a plan that's being brought forward, and of course there'll be more in coming weeks and days that's responsive to that. But our first target is just no tariffs. We don't want to see his threat of February 1st, 25% become a reality. We don't want to see that. But if it is become a reality, we're going to respond hard. Everything's on the table to protect Ontario jobs and also recognize Americans will also pay the price.
So his initial reasoning for implementing them was, he talked about border strength and things like that. And then the feds put an extra $1 billion into border programs to address that. And what you're talking about, him sort of moving the goalposts, if you will, the initial, I don't even know if there was an ask, but the initial recognitions that he made saying this is why we need tariffs because we want you guys to step on X and Y, those seem to have been done within the following couple of weeks, as did Mexico. So now it's kind of evolved a bit more into the deficit situation, like the goalpost moved and now this is why he wants the tariffs, is because of what he's perceiving as a trade deficit. Now there are people, or at least in the previous administration, there would have been people to advise him on what you're mentioning about saying there was, if you take out the oil aspect, there's a balanced trade situation. But now though the advisors aren't necessarily there, so you get more creative math probably getting to them, if any math is getting to them. So how do you deal, or how do you think, whether it's the premiers or at the federal level, needs to address, you don't want it to happen at all. Just to get around to my question. Do you have any perception of what would need to be done to calm that request?
Well, I'll say that the Premier and a number of ministers, the Minister of Economic Development, for example, the Minister of Energy, Minister of Mines in the North, they have been to Washington. They've been calling every governor in every state where there's a large proportion of jobs that are dependent on trade with Ontario. They've been calling, labor partners, international unions that have members on both sides of the border who will be hurt by this, in manufacturing, for example. Agricultural partnerships that, for example, are dependent on fertilizer coming from Sarnia, where Cargill is producing massive amounts of fertilizer that are shipped to Americans predominantly. And look at potash out in Saskatchewan. I know it's not Ontario, but American farmers are going to have increased costs. If that potash has costs on it, that's going to directly hurt their ability to produce food at an affordable rate. When you have
cost of the food chain,
you increase the cost of fertilizer, one of the biggest inputs, by 25%, you're going to have impact on the store shelves. Now that could take a little bit of time to roll out, but that is actually inflationary. And so the Premier's been, and our entire government have been working the phones with every state governor, every senator, every Republican member of Congress who has proximity to Mr. Trump or the president, I guess now, and sharing that message that, look, this is going to hurt Ontario, yes, but this is going to hurt Americans, and we don't want to have to bring forward retaliatory measures because we don't want those tariffs to begin with. But make no mistakes, we were beside you at the beaches of Normandy, and we will be beside you in other times that you are in need, but we also aren't going to be trodden on. We're not going to be treated as second-class citizens here in our allyship, and we're going to take measures that protect Ontario jobs, Ontario workers, and that continue to build that option. So they have a choice. They have two paths, they have two roads, and every avenue that we can to get that message to the president is what we're doing.
So just to sort of wrap that up, as we record this podcast on Friday the 24th, there's been some talk of an election call. Now, hearing Premier Ford over the last week or 10 days, he's mentioned the word wanting to have some level of a mandate to deal with this issue. What should he be reelected? I'll say with a majority, because then he could control what he wanted to do. What would that mandate do?
Well, potentially there could be tens of billions of dollars in spending that need to go into affected industries. A 25% impact is absolutely massive.
Are you talking subsidy there?
Support programs for both workers and businesses. If there is a trade war, we hope and pray that it's short and brief, that there's a back and forth that leads to a resolution where we realize that neither party wins when we're in this kind of tariff war. But we also know that in the meantime, Ontario workers and Ontario businesses need to have financial support to make it through. And the federal government is prorogued right now. They actually don't have a mechanism to rebate the funds that need to be provided to workers, even through collecting tariffs on workers or on products. Those funds actually can't even flow to workers from the feds because they don't have a mandate to be able to pass legislation to enable that. So it's really about enabling the provincial government to support those workers, and also to go to the feds whenever that federal election is, and whenever the new prime minister is there, and say, listen, we have a mandate from the people, here's what the priorities have to be for Ontario and for workers and in this trade war, and have a strong voice. I think you and I both know, often in the lead up to an election, it becomes more and more challenging to make decisions that have to be made as people head into that last year of a mandate. You often see this with mandates of all stripes and sizes. It's almost like, the focus on the upcoming election takes away some of the emphasis on some of those longer term decisions that have to happen, and I don't think that's a huge surprise to people. With 4 years where it overlaps with President Trump and with whoever the new prime minister, either the new coming Liberal or when there's an election and perhaps Mr. Poilievre becomes Prime Minister, we'll be able to, over the course of both of those terms, say, listen, we're tit for tat here. You know, it's not like we're having to look at an election coming up. We're able to respond to that in a firm manner.
Good, thanks. Now, there's also been some discussion lately about what's happening with the GO. Now, I know I've been kind of anticipating some level of movement pre-election. If there's election coming, there's probably something going to happen. Is there anything, what would be the next step in that process for the GO when we get there?
Well, I'm going to tell you first and foremost, we are 100% committed to making that GO train happen. The Premier's promised me and the Minister of Transportation have promised me we're going to make that happen. And I know we're recording this on the 24th, so I'm going to be careful about what I say, but I will say the Minister of Transportation and I are scheduled to have an announcement on Tuesday morning, the 28th, and we'll be sharing more details about the next steps and progress on that file. But I would say, you know, the Premier and our government have shown that we can get things done here for Grimsby and surrounding areas. The new hospital wasn't ever happening under the Liberals or when they were supported by the NDP. We didn't see the new investments in things like the Grimsby Peach King Centre, delivering $16 million for that site. We didn't see investments in local schools. We've had now new additions at Smith Public School, Lakeview School. So this is a government that can deliver for Niagara West, high school as well, although it's its own conversation about that one.
Yes.
But that's a demonstration that this is a government that's really recognizing this area deserves support because of its rapidly growing population. And because it was ignored for a long time, and just like we were able to get it done for those projects, I have no doubt we'll get it done for Grimsby GO.
So what do you see as the, going into election, potentially, I'm sure we'll at some point, but what do you see as the key issues right now for our riding at this point in time?
I would say a lot of the issues that are in our riding are not too different from many of the issues across the rest of the province. You know, affordability and the economy are top of mind, and so that's why we brought forward measures like, you know, getting rid of the license plate sticker fee, putting in gas tax cuts, freezing a whole bunch of fees that were in place, providing a taxpayer's rebate to the people of the province. So I would say affordability is huge. And having a strong economy also in the context of tariffs means having a government that's shown it's able to invest in workers and in infrastructure projects. We've invested billions of dollars in workers training programs to get people trained for the jobs that exist, not for the jobs that don't. And we've been able to put money also into our local projects, like the projects I talked about, our hospital or our local expansions that also provide local jobs. Additionally, I would say healthcare. Continuing to build out the primary care network in the province, hugely important that everyone has a family doctor and a primary care provider. We've launched 2 new medical schools, the first new medical schools in the 21st century here in Ontario. We more than doubled the nursing positions at Brock from 370 to 800. But those are only just starting to churn out the people that we actually need, right?
Yeah.
And those, as you know, going from saying we're going to have a new school to getting that new school actually graduating people takes time. So we need to keep our pedal to the metal on healthcare, making sure that we're building up more of our family doctor teams and supporting that. And I would say locally, a lot of the emphasis has been on as well on ensuring that the infrastructure we have in place can handle the growth that's happening in Grimsby and Lincoln and West Lincoln. I mean, you know, Smithville's going to double over the next 20 years. It's going to be the size of Grimsby in population. They need to have the water, wastewater treatment sites that they need to manage that.
Now, I saw that notice came out from West Lincoln Township yesterday with a comment from Mayor Ganan about looking for provincial support to expand their capacity and facilities there for movement of water and wastewater, just exactly along the line that you're saying. And then in this week's paper, we had an ad from Niagara Region to expand the water treatment facility, and that's to deal with expanding needs all the way down through Lincoln along the shore and Grimsby on the lake to the west. So, you know, their growth is what I wanted to move on to there. And you mentioned about having the capacity in your infrastructure to deal with that. Density and heights are 2 concerns immediately. Grimsby, you've got the Wolverton just up the street here being now proposed for 10 from 7. And lots of talk about the developments down at Victoria Shores, and Prudham's sort of in the works further down as two other major projects. And certainly neighbors in the larger community being concerned with the densities, but density and somewhat height along with it is what kind of has to happen to deal with when you talk about housing need, both affordable housing and various definitions there. But maybe if you could outline what the immediate future may look at for what the government may do to support, alleviating the housing need pressure. And by housing, it could be apartment, could be single detached, could be any kind of living arrangement.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I would say that those investments that are being made into site servicing, like water and wastewater and roads, culverts, bridges, those kinds of things, at the end of the day, if those are costs that are otherwise carried by ratepayers, taxpayers, municipal property taxpayers, people's property taxes would be a lot higher. I've announced almost $50 million for different municipalities in the region of Niagara in supports. A 1% increase on a tax bill for the region of Niagara is about $4.5 million. So that's about a 10% property tax increase to provide those services, which would otherwise have been provided by municipal taxpayers. That isn't happening because the province has invested those funds to cover those projects. Mm-hmm. So in real terms, that means, I know it's not a tax cut, but it is a tax avoidance in terms of your municipal tax rate, right? So that's one part of it.
There's only one
There's only one taxpayer, as a former premier once said.
That's it.
The other thing I would say about intensification, if you're against intensifying our downtowns, I hope that you are campaigning to make our cities wider and broader and more spread out. And the reason I say that, I'm a little bit facetious, but the reality is I am running into has to go somewhere. And I'm running into people who were viciously opposed to any changes to the Greenbelt and said we cannot open up any land, which is great, that's fine. If you want to be against opening up the Greenbelt, we heard the people loud and clear. But we were very clear when we said we're not going to open the Greenbelt. Those homes have to go somewhere. So they are going to go up. And if you are protesting any changes to the Greenbelt, I hope you're also in favor of intensification. And if you're not, there's an inconsistency there. And that, I believe, is really concerning when I'm running into people who are both against touching the Greenbelt and against any intensification. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Yeah. All of us came here from somewhere. We all moved to this place from somewhere. And if you live in a place at one point that was untouched, perfect soil, somewhere, in Grimsby especially, right? Now you have your spot, I have my spot, hallelujah. The reality is we have a massively growing population in the province as a whole, not just unique here. And we need to ensure that those homes are getting built and that they're getting built fast, that they're getting built in all sorts of fashions. I mean, whether it's a single family detached home, which I still believe there's a place for in our society, or a condo building with more stories. You need every kind of housing in order to meet that. And I'm going to put it into proportion. We had almost 800,000 people move to this province last year. And we built so a city the size of Mississauga. And we built the same amount of homes as about the city of London, right? 300 and some odd thousand, not homes. We built 190,000 homes, but the equivalent home for almost 400,000 people. The math doesn't work. You need to get more, it's supply and demand. If you don't have enough homes, and you have lots of people, the cost of those homes is going to go up.
Part of that debate, the fact, what you're speaking is true fact. What that particular point though evolves into is immigration policy that turned the tap on too fast before, just like you're talking about having infrastructure for wastewater. Yeah. You got to have the infrastructure to be able to put a house or a condo there.
Amen.
We didn't have the infrastructure for housing, and we turned the tap on, and hundreds of thousands of people came in with no place to go.
Yeah.
So the cart was before the horse, and we're feeling the effect of that.
Absolutely, and it's frustrating because the province and local municipalities, I don't blame them for this either, because poor local municipalities have had a massive increase in service expectations from this population.
It's people coming out from urban areas. They move to an urban area thinking they could find a spot.
Right.
And the water's running downhill.
Yeah, and listen, Canada has been very welcoming and opening to new Canadians. All of us, if we're not Indigenous, came from somewhere at some point. So this isn't about being against immigration at all.
No.
This is about making sure you have the services in place to handle it, right?
It's a number.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not fair either I think that the federal government, in many cases, didn't make commensurate investments. Like, you're not seeing the federal government come out with money for these like housing enabling water systems or housing enabling core services for municipalities. The province is carrying that and supporting local municipalities in those investments. But the feds are the ones who, you talk about turning on the tap. They have their hand on the lever of that tap.
Right.
And I think they pulled back a little bit as a response to those needs. But I think they should also be stepping forward and investing in our communities.
Well, that's
and I'm just saying
part of
that's one of the reasons why I think it's important that if we're given a mandate by the people of the province, we'll be able to hold whoever's there in Ottawa over the next 4 years, their feet to the fire, and say, people expect you to invest in our communities.
So along that line, and you're mentioning about investing in things like the Peach King and other programs, I'm going to sort of lobby a bit specifically for West Lincoln here, tying in with what I saw from Mayor Ganan's comments from Roma. But also going back even, I'm going to say 15 years was the first time I mentioned something in my column that West Lincoln needs to think about actually going up, like Grimsby on the lake, like not like Grimsby on the lake. No, let me retract that.
You'll get some comments.
But just going up, because it's hard to imagine knowing Smithville for what it is and quiet, nice agriculture community, et cetera, But Smithville and Fort Erie were the two communities tagged for development in Greenbelt, right? They have the capacity, and that capacity will run out one day. If you build out, like you're mentioning, right? So,
well, I think it's both, though. I don't think you can do
it's
neither
balance.
or.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that.
I guarantee if you said, hey, like we should put up 10 stories in the in the middle of Smithville, people are gonna, well, we're surrounded by soybeans.
I'm not even saying
soil.
I'm not even saying downtown, but if they started now to think about, there's another question after this, but my point there is they could. It's hard to imagine needing to save green space in West Lincoln.
Yeah.
It's really hard. But in 50 years, they're going to say, that whole development that has 250 units on it,
right.
If we'd have done 2 8-story towers, we would have all green space for the kids to play in or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But along the lines of connecting to my earlier comment about peach cake or whatever, do you think that there's a capacity for the province to create programs? Like, there wouldn't be planning expertise in West Lincoln to go up. If the province was providing, not engineering support, like the province isn't sending engineers in, but grants for municipalities to be able to contract different studies, and they do apply for studies and things all the time, but something that deals with expansion on I'll say an urban scale in a more rural setting.
Well, we did have something called the MMPF, the Municipal Modernization Program funding, which is like, I don't know why all of our programs
I haven't seen
bureaucratic.
I haven't seen anything.
Okay, it was a couple of years ago, and we opened up eligibility for applications from municipalities for funds that would enable them to essentially look at where is the puck going, to the Wayne Gretzky quote, not where the puck is, where's the puck going, and what investments do we need to prepare for that. And we actually did get a bunch of applications from local municipalities, and one of those that I remember was working on shared planning services between more municipalities. We devolved planning responsibilities that comes into effect, I think, March 31st, that the planning responsibilities held by the region are going to go to the lower tier municipalities. Now, I would also urge a town like Smithville, or West Lincoln rather, and other municipalities who are working on these projects to piggyback off of each other. There's going to be slower times and busier times in terms of those sorts of those projects. Work together on, if you're doing prudence development in Lincoln, for example, their department should be working closely with what could be coming down the pipe on Grimsby on the Lake. You guys in Grimsby have more experience than they do in West Lincoln, work together there. And so that municipal modernization program funding did have funding to allow for more shared services, and I'm hoping that there'll be more rounds. We'll see what comes down the pipe. But it makes sense to me. I would also just say that all of these municipalities too, they've kind of had slightly different timing in their evolutions.
Oh, sure.
Right, and that's something really interesting. Intensification in Lincoln was not really a thing until like 3 years ago.
But it's a wave. When I first came to town, everybody in Grimsby was talking about not wanting to be like Stony Creek because the wave was hitting Stony Creek. And then after, into the early 2000s, it started to come here, and then Up until 2010, 2012, it was more prominent.
Yeah.
And then, mid-teens to, 2018 was where it started to hit Lincoln. And it's moving.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to necessarily go into St. Catharines. It's going to go to Smithville, being the back door of Hamilton, and West Lincoln after Lincoln.
St. Catharines is happening in the downtown. There's a bunch of proposals underway. But up the mountain,
well, they're more out of land, right? So they're going to be reusing. They're going to be brownfields, things like that.
Yeah, it is a different side.
Now with Grimsby, what I was saying before too about helping those communities plan that infrastructure that they need. Grimsby, when Grimsby and the Lake happened, they used to they would contract for a project because they didn't have anybody with expertise on hunting.
Yeah.
So they would bring somebody in to be the town's engineer or consultant, if you will, on a project. Went project by project. Now I think there's been so many that they've actually done hiring, looking for that expertise, and I think Lincoln was similar. They were doing some contracting, but and again that could have changed over time as demand. There's more consistent demand as opposed to fluctuating. But West Lincoln, I'm sure, would be in a situation where there wouldn't be anybody in-house that has a high-rise.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be speculating to know. But
I would be too. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
But that's it for me. Is there anything that you want to mention that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a lot of concern and there's a lot of threats from the tariff challenges that we're going to be facing, and hopefully, pray that doesn't happen. But the Premier is committed to being a voice for this province, for the workers and businesses in this province. But I also think that there's an opportunity and I think a really important consideration for us as individual consumers right now, as individual Canadians and people in Ontario, to support local. And I know that that's kind of a thing everyone talks about and it's on our bumper stickers and stuff, but look,
Doesn't always happen.
it doesn't always happen, and I get it. Like pricing is a big consideration, but right now, I think of all times is a time to look at where that product is made, and try to support not just local necessarily in the sense of like just downtown, although I support our downtowns and everything, or even just Ontario, but Canada-wide. I think that vice versa. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. I hope Manitobans buy things made in Ontario, and I hope we buy things made in Halifax, and I hope Halifax buys stuff from Vancouver. You know what I mean? And I think that that can have a massive impact. You look at some of the purchasing patterns of your company or your individual household, and you start adding up how many thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that is. Please consider how you can support suppliers and parts that are made, because if thousands and millions of us make conscious decisions, that can really help, I think, repatriate some industry here.
Oh, and that was one of the benefits of Trump's comments was, I'm really struggling to think how far back it would go to think of some of the personalities that you've heard commenting in the last week or 10 days that are agreeing. And it's Canada first.
Yeah.
And so there could be something very positive in terms of national identity and thinking Canada first, which Canadians aren't. Canadians are too selfless.
Where I notice it is I always think every time I go to the U.S., I think, wow, I wish we had as many Canadian flags as they have American flags everywhere. Everywhere you go in the U.S., it's like literally like everywhere is the stars and stripes, and then you come to Canada, it's like three guys.
Yeah,
maybe.
Maybe. You drive all day and see one.
Yeah, so we need to be proud of being Canadian. We've brought a lot to this.
That could be it all.
And we brought a lot to America. Like, you start adding all of the technologies that we're interdependent on, and I'm not downplaying the United States. It's an amazing country in terms of its strength, its power, the effect it's had on the world, its ideas, its culture. I'm not downplaying that. But Canada's not insignificant either, and we need to do one to stand up for ourselves.
I'm with you.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming in, Sam. Appreciate it. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you again with the next installment.